So I have the pleasure of introducing this morning, all the way from Houston, Texas, via Zoom video. Is he still up there?
Yes.
Yes. Bill Bray. Bill is a naval architect. He earned a bachelor's degree and a master's in naval architecture and marine engineering from the University of Michigan, and an MBA from NYU's School of Business. He started lobbying for higher energy taxes in 1990 while living in Europe, where gas prices were much higher than in the US. Bill Bray is also a ruling elder at the Woodlands Community Presbyterian Church in Houston. He led the successful recent effort to have the PCUSA General Assembly endorse carbon fee and dividend, a climate policy solution that PCUSA described as, quote, a just and effective way to avert the worst of climate chaos, rapidly reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and transition to a clean energy future, end quote. Bill founded and leads the Presbyterian Action Team of Citizens Climate Lobby, a not-for-profit, volunteer-driven organization that advocates for bipartisan climate change solutions in the US Congress, including the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, known as HR 763. Bill is also a member of Citizen Climate Lobby's Conservative Caucus and CCL's Team Oil. We're pleased to have with us today also representatives of Citizens Climate Lobby, and Bill will introduce them to you. Finally, I just wanted to mention again that as part of University Presbyterian's certification last year as an Earth Care congregation, our session affirmed PCUSA's Earth Care pledge to integrate environmental practices and thinking into our ministry, missions, and operations. Among other things, we pledge that, quote, our outreach will encourage public policy and community involvement that protects and restores the vulnerable and degraded earth, as well as oppressed and neglected people. We will seek to achieve environmental justice through coalitions and ecumenical partnerships, end quote. So please join me in welcoming Bill Bray.
Thank you, John, and thank you all for coming to today to hear about Presbyterian actions to address climate change. As John said, we have some folks from the local Citizens Climate Lobby chapter, Justin, Bill, and any other CCLers in the room, you raise your hand there. But thank you all for coming. For an agenda, I'm going to tell you a little bit about where I'm coming from, and then Presbyterian PCUSA actions on climate change and the background there. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the science. I understand William Barron III talked last week and talked a lot about the science and the consequences. We'll just do a little science, and we'll focus more on the economics and political science of the solution that we're pushing, carbon pricing, to address climate change. And we'll try to explain why we think this is a faithful alternative. And then we'll talk about action, what's being done and what we can do. So as John said, I'm a ruling elder at the Woodlands Community Presbyterian Church in Texas. I spent my career with Exxon and Exxon Mobil for over 3 decades, and am proud of what I contributed to the energy industry and what the energy industry has contributed to society, but we do need to change now. But we lived in Europe and saw the higher gasoline prices and petrol taxes. We got efficient with how we used energy, and I wrote my first letter to the first President Bush during the first Gulf War, which was partially about oil, saying we ought to have higher energy prices in the US. Working for Exxon, some of my colleagues thought I was a little bit off the reservation, but now Exxon, and for a decade, Exxon has supported a revenue neutral carbon tax that we'll talk more about later. When I retired 5 years ago, I wanted to advocate for carbon pricing and found Citizens Climate Lobby, which was a perfect match for me and for Presbyterians. And at the same time, the Presbyterian denomination was addressing divestment from the fossil fuel industry as an issue and what we should do about that. So that got me involved in the PCUSA side of it. PCUSA has been advocating for action on climate change for decades. When you look back at it, they were a leading edge when it wasn't an issue in society still, but recognized that we needed to address this. And over a decade ago, they called for pricing greenhouse gas emissions to internalize the cost to society into the price of fossil fuels. In 2012, divestment of fossil fuel, divestment has been an issue for the PCUSA for decades, going back to South Africa and Israel. But divestment of fossil fuels became an issue in 2012, and a group of Presbyterians from the Synod of the Sun on the Gulf Coast got together and said, how should we respond to this call for divestment from the whole industry? We came up with what we called faithful alternatives that we thought were better solutions to address climate change. And since I was a champion for carbon pricing, I was the overture advocate for our support for carbon pricing overture at Portland in 2016. We had near unanimous support for our overture in committee. Only one person voted against it, but it got tied up in the divestment issue in the plenary in the main body, and so it never got voted on. So that was not following proper parliamentary procedure, but that's what happened. And we came back 2 years later with two more overture advocates. We had two overtures, and it was approved in committee by over 80% and in the main body by over 80%. So large support for our overture. And our overture expressed its profound concern for the destruction of climate change and all God's creation, including a disproportionate impact on those living in poverty and in the least developed countries, those least responsible for the emission of greenhouse gases. And it recognized the gospel's call and moral mandate for humanity to shift to a sustainable energy regime in ways that are both just and compassionate. It also encouraged us to work with citizens, voters, legislators, and other organizations with parallel goals, and very importantly, to protect the poor. All regulations or carbon pricing to address greenhouse gas emissions and reduce them are economically regressive in that lower income folks spend a greater proportion of their limited income on basic needs like energy. So they end up shouldering a greater proportion of the burden, however we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So our proposal has a dividend to address that. Carbon pricing is the most efficient method of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and increasing investment in the cleaner alternatives. We have a huge energy system, and we need to make a huge transition to cleaner energy sources. And this will both reduce our emissions and increase investment. And a carbon tax is far more efficient than cap and trade in reducing emissions, and it's less susceptible to manipulation that cap and trade is susceptible to. And our proposal has a per capita dividend to address the regressive nature. And the carbon fee and dividend proposal that is designed by Citizens Climate Lobby was specifically referenced in our overture. Talking about the science and the economics and the faith, we have a naturally occurring greenhouse gas effect in our wonderful God's creation here. And sunlight comes through our atmosphere, warms the earth, and the earth radiates heat energy at different wavelengths that the greenhouse gases are opaque to. The greenhouse gases are basically transparent to sunlight, but opaque to radiant heat energy. So that traps heat, and this effect has been known for centuries. Back in the 1820s, Joseph Fourier, a French mathematician, calculated that the Earth would be 60 degrees Fahrenheit cooler if we didn't have this naturally occurring greenhouse gas effect. So we need this. Life would have never developed as we know it without the greenhouse gas effect. 60 degrees that Fourier calculated is still the accepted number. The problem is that we're increasing our CO2 by 50% and methane and other important greenhouse gas by over 100%. So that leads to a rise in temperature. This is rising temperature over the course of the Industrial Revolution. This is temperature over 6,000 years, basically the course of our human society development. The top curve shows the temperature. We've been blessed by relatively stable temperatures for this 6,000 years until the Industrial Revolution here. And below it shows carbon dioxide. This graph shows over 500,000 years, so showing the glacial cycles, and these cycles are caused by the Earth's attitude relative to the sun. And according to the naturally occurring cycles, we were at a peak and we were going to be drifting into another glacial ice age. But with our greenhouse gas emissions, we've changed that trajectory significantly. A lot of people think that the scientific community is split sort of 50-50 on this issue because they see two talking heads on TV. But in fact, it's 97+% of atmospheric scientists that know it's real, it's us, there's consensus, it's bad, but there are solutions. And when you talk to atmospheric scientists about this, they say this isn't the important number. The important number is peer-reviewed papers. And of peer-reviewed papers, 97 or 99+%, depending on which study you look at, are convinced that it's real, it's us, and we need to take action. And they've done studies of the few papers that don't agree with the consensus, and they've found factual or data or analytical errors. And when they correct for those, then those papers also agree with the consensus. Some people say, well, this is academic scientists, atmospheric scientists, and they need to make this a bigger issue, so they'll get funding. But there are two other segments of society that have atmospheric scientists who agree with this consensus. One of those is the defense community. This is Admiral David Titley. He's a retired Rear Admiral and Chief Oceanographer of the US Navy. He's also on Citizens Climate Lobby Advisory Board. He likes to ask a group like this, do you believe in climate change? Everybody raises their hand. He says, I don't. This should be about science. This shouldn't be about a belief issue. And the defense community as a whole is in agreement, and there's lots of reports that they've written saying this is a major national security issue. They view climate change as a threat multiplier, making conflict situations around the earth that they have to respond to and be ready to respond to. It makes these worse. It multiplies the threat. Another segment of our society is the oil and gas industry that I worked in. This is a cartoon in the Houston Chronicle from during the Paris climate talks, when a group of Exxon executives came down and told the Chronicle why they know that climate change is real, the risk is real, and the government should take action. And the oil major, and it's not just oil, Exxon, it's most of the oil majors support this, support carbon pricing. And the oil majors are some of the most technology savvy, earth science based companies. If there was any way to argue the science against this, they would be doing that. But they're not. They know we need to change, and they know carbon pricing is the efficient way to change. But for these companies as a group to say, please price our products so we sell less, is a difficult decision, but that's what they're saying, and we should pay attention to that. Here's a corporate website showing their position on carbon tax, revenue neutral carbon tax that they've had for over a decade now. The scientific community has the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, which has been issuing reports for decades, and they've had a wide representation of scientists from across the society, including from Exxon Mobil, has been a founding member of that. Their reports have gotten increasingly urgent, and their latest report said we have 12 years to cut our global emissions by 50%. So they are more than ringing the warning bells that we need to be taking action on this. So this is a microeconomic chart for the demand curve. And it shows price on the left and quantity on the bottom. At the moment, and this is the curve is the demand that society has at a given price. At the moment, we're at the private cost. And this could be for fossil fuels in total, or we could consider gasoline. But we're at the private cost, basically what industry can find, develop, produce, refine, and distribute gasoline for. And so society demands this quantity at private cost. But there is a significant additional cost to society that's not included in this private cost. Economists call this a market failure, because we're consuming this amount, but if we could include the full social cost, we'd be at a much smaller quantity that society would want to burn. And this private cost the social cost includes the cost of climate change, the health effects. It also includes other costs that our society is paying. There are estimates that the US has spent $8 trillion over the last 35 years keeping the Arabian Gulf open. And this has been for multiple reasons, but a major driver was to keep oil flowing, cheap oil flowing to the world. So we've benefited from that. The world has benefited. But you and I have been paying for that out of our taxes. And in pure economic theory, a large portion of that should be borne by the product that it's supporting and included in the social cost. This chart shows a carbon tax and a carbon fee, and numerically they're equivalent. But a carbon tax is when the government collects the tax revenue and spends it. But we call it a carbon fee when it's returned to the population and the government isn't spending it, but the population is spending it. And so this tax revenue is the quantity that we're still consuming times the full social cost here, less the private cost. So that's a significant amount of revenue. So our CCLs is the best first step to address climate change. It's not the only thing we need to do, but it will start transitioning our economy to cleaner sources. And it's a fee that's placed on fossil fuels where they enter the economy. It starts out at a relatively low $15 per ton of CO2 when it's eventually emitted, and raises at $10 a ton of CO2 every year. So it starts out relatively low and raises at a relatively steep rate. In terms of your pocketbook, that's starting out at 15 cents additional on a gallon of gasoline. After a decade, it's about $1 additional. And after 2 decades, it's about $2 additional. But that's not just on gasoline, it's on all fossil fuels and all the products that are made with fossil fuels. To put that in a little bit of global context, in Europe now they're paying $3 per US gallon in taxes, in petrol taxes. We don't reach that level for 3 decades. So they're still driving cars there, and we can still drive cars here, but this will start us on the transition to cleaner energy and reduced emissions. And we want to return 100% of the net revenue in monthly per capita dividend checks. So this takes away the regressive nature of the fee, and the numbers work out that the lower 2/3 of economic units, middle and lower income families, are going to be break even or slightly ahead. And the upper third of us that have bigger houses, bigger cars, take more trips, have more stuff, and emit more of the greenhouse gases are going to pay slightly more. But that's appropriate. We can afford it. And the third leg of the stool is a border adjustment, which is very important to both protect American manufacturing and help export our level of carbon pricing around the world. It's a fee on goods imported from countries that don't have a similar level of carbon pricing on the carbon content, and a rebate when we export. So we won't export dirty production or oil and gas production. So this proposal is effective. It's good for people and the economy. It's bipartisan, which is critical not only to get it enacted in the first place, but to assure that it doesn't get rolled over when political winds change. And it's revenue neutral, so it doesn't grow the government. Columbia University's Center for Global Energy Policy did a quantitative study and concluded, and the following numbers, next couple of slides, are all from that study. And it concluded that this proposal will reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 40% over the next 12 years. So almost what the IPCC said we need to do. Lives in the first decade because of less particulate pollution. It will create jobs and grow the economy, over 2 million new jobs over the first decade. And it will create a monthly dividend check. And that will start out lower, but it will grow as the fee grows to over $4,000 for a family of 4 after the first decade. And this is an important feature from a Presbyterian standpoint to make it fair and to take away the regressive nature. It's also politically an important element because once families start getting this carbon dividend, it's going to make it very difficult to roll the legislation back. And it's bipartisan. You can test different policy solutions on your own with this En-ROADS Climate Solutions Simulator. This is on the internet. You can Google En-ROADS and you'll find it. You can put in different policy solutions and it will calculate the temperature at the end of the century. When you put in our carbon price and the other effects of our bill, this goes down to 2.7 degrees, I think, 2.6 degrees, which is most of what the scientists say we need to do. But all sorts of other policies that we can do that people talk about don't make a real big impact on this. Carbon pricing makes the biggest impact on this. So Citizens Climate Lobby and education are grassroots education and lobbying organization. We have 170,000 members and double or triple in size every year. We're nonpartisan. We're working with everyone, especially those who oppose us. And our bill is, we're adamant that it needs to be a bipartisan bill. We're nonprofit. The education is a 501c3. So if you're interested in donating, that's the organization you'd like to donate to for tax purposes. And we are laser focused on our solution. It's easy to be against things. We're for something. We're for this carbon fee and dividend solution. And being laser focused on that one solution as an organization is a huge asset, because it allows me, an industrial environmentalist, to work with extreme left tree-hugging environmentalists. And we don't agree on a lot of things, but we agree that carbon fee and dividend is the best first step. And we have one rule: to treat everyone with respect, appreciation, and gratitude. Again, especially those that oppose us. We have some powerful allies. A strategic partner of CCL is the Climate Leadership Council. They are started by James Baker III and George Schultz. Their carbon dividend proposal is similar to ours in that it has a dividend, it has a border adjustment, it has a slightly different pricing level. They start out higher and don't go up as high. And they have a lot of major corporations, including now 5 of the super major oil companies and other major companies, Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble. And that it helps on the conservative side of the aisle. Another element that CCL has taken on is helping to initiate the Climate Solutions Caucus in the U.S. House of Representatives. It grew in the last Congress to 45 Republicans and 45 Democrats. It was called a Noah's Ark caucus. You needed to join one together to keep equal numbers to work on bipartisan solutions for climate change. In the new Congress, the rules have changed, but it's still up to 41 Democrats and 22 Republicans. Recently, there is a Senate Climate Solutions Caucus, and they have limited the numbers. They have 8 members. They could have more, but they're limiting the numbers because they think that will allow them to get legislation in the Senate sooner. And the Democratic head has said they want market-based solutions, which is carbon pricing. Lisa Murkowski, Romney, and Lindsey Graham are some of the big name Republicans in that group. Well, politicians don't create political will, they respond to it. So what the voters say, what you, the voters, say is important. This is Lunt's global survey that does surveys mainly for the conservative Republican Party. And their recent poll showed that 2/3 of American voters support a carbon fee and dividend. Over 50% of Republicans do, and over 75% of Republicans under 40 do. I'm generally a Republican voter, conservative, and I'm telling my politicians that you need to pay attention to this, because the Republicans are going to have a real problem if we're not listening to our youth. This is a Yale climate opinion poll for North Carolina 04, your district there, I understand. And this shows that 70% of your voters are in carbon taxes. Well, why should Presbyterians be engaged? For me, it's the least of us. We live in Houston. We just had Hurricane Harvey. That impacted families across the economic spectrum. But the recovery has not been equal across the economic spectrum. The folks who had flood insurance, who had savings, they've repaired their homes, they've raised them 5-6 feet in cases. But the poor, the folks who didn't have flood insurance, who are living paycheck to paycheck, their recovery has been very different. They're still living with friends and they're not recovering at all, like the richer folks. And this is going to play out in coastal cities around the world. There are huge communities in Bangladesh, Nigeria, Indonesia, the Philippines, in low-lying areas. And when they have these huge flooding cases due to weather events, we're going to have more and more of, the poor are going to be impacted. The rich are going to be able to move and repair their damage and harden their homes, but it's the poor who are going to be impacted. Likewise with food. There's already starvation, although it's getting better. With climate change, it's going to get worse, and it's the poor who are going to be impacted. There's also people with not enough access to fresh drinking water. And again, that's going to be worse with climate change, and it's not going to be the rich that are impacted. So back to our overture. It didn't just say carbon pricing is a good thing. It said, we Presbyterians need to work with citizens, voters, legislators, and other decision makers and organizations that have parallel goals. And there was a footnote 1, and that's Citizens Climate Lobby. And that's to bring in to effect national legislation to create consistent, rational, and escalating price for carbon emissions. It also directed PCUSA organizations to help make that happen. So PCUSA has issued support for HR 763 and the bill before that. This HR 763 is basically our carbon fee and dividend proposal that I've been talking about. The denomination has issued statements of support. They've issued a statement of support to over 8,000 Presbyterians who have signed up to get action alerts of issues that are in Congress that they should be calling and writing their members of Congress about. We've had various other statements of support, and they are working with ecumenical and interfaith groups to progress carbon pricing and support for HR 763. PCUSA has also participated in faith panels at our CCL's national conference in June. HR 763 is up to 78 co-sponsors, including David Price, your representative. So when you see him and talk to him, give him some love for his support for that. There are other carbon climate bills in Congress, a growing number. Ours has by far the most supporters. This shows the other climate bills with the green here is other carbon pricing bills. Ours is the highest level of carbon price, and it's the only one with a dividend. But having all these bills in Congress is increasing the discussion and the focus on the benefits of carbon pricing. We also have a Presbyterian action team within Citizens Climate Lobby that was formed to provide education and outreach on what our overture was and says, and using that as a lever of political will. We have over 50 members and are growing. We have a call twice a month that we'd love to have anyone participate in. And we're connecting with the various PCUSA national organizations, both in Louisville, the Office of Public Witness in Washington, D.C. That's the PCUSA lobbying arm that represents our denomination to the government. And we're working with all sorts of other organizations within PCUSA. We're looking for communicating in every form we can to the Presbyterian denomination, including Sunday school classes like this. Thank you. This is our first virtual Sunday school, so we're hoping that we can use this to reach more of the 9,000 congregations across the country. We're talking to presbyteries and seminaries and retirement communities, and we're trying to connect the 9,000 congregations with the 500 CCL chapters around the country, which is why Justin and Bill and company are there to help connect you with their chapter. We also found that 5% of the U.S. Congress self-identifies as Presbyterians. So we wrote a letter from our Presbyterian Action Team to these members of Congress. Of those, 9 are Republican senators, which are a key demographic that we need to get our bill passed. We've also started a separate Presbyterians for Carbon Dividend group now, so we have an entity within PCUSA, and we're working with PCUSA on their ecumenical advocacy days coming up in April at Earth Day. And the theme for ecumenical advocacy days this year is climate change and economic injustice. So it's a perfect platform for our proposal. So our asks are that you write your members of Congress. In Washington, they say that when they get a letter from a constituent, they view that as 500 people back in the district having the same view, because not everybody uses their voice, and when you do, it's heard. So as Thomas Jefferson said, we don't have a democracy of the majority. We have a democracy of the majority who participate. So Justin and Bill have letters there, and they will pass them out. If you take them home and send them in yourself, that's fine. But we'd ask you to do it today and leave them at church, or get them to John or Justin, because 1, it's lots more likely that you'll complete it. But 2, and even more importantly, if you give them to your local chapter, they'll copy them. They'll, for both senators and your representative, and they will hand deliver them. So that helps build the relationship between CCL and your members of Congress. If you learn about the issue and share it with others, that's the way we're changing public opinion on this. And public opinion is changing. We just need to continue it changing and move it faster on getting to a solution like carbon pricing. And we'd also ask, who do you know? Are there other groups that are around who would like to have a presentation like this? The local CCL chapters has presenters. They'd love to talk to any groups who are interested. And what local leaders do you know? One of the main ways to move Congress is to get local leaders on board, both in industry, other businesses, faith organizations, local politicians, Chamber of Commerce. And you can engage your church. Your church can endorse HR 763. I think there are 8 Presbyterian organizations who have individually endorsed the bill, and University Presbyterian could do that as well. And if you agree with Citizens Climate Lobby's Carbon Fee and Dividend, please join our group. There's no cost. You can be as active as your time allows and your interest, but it's a numbers game. And the more members we have, the bigger our voice in Congress. And if you're interested, join our Presbyterians for Carbon Dividends now. So when you write your letters, remember, this is what our church is saying. Tell your Congress to support HR 763, or if you're focused on your senator, to introduce companion legislation. Here's the information for our call twice a month, the first and third Thursdays at those times. And it's a Zoom call like this, so we can see each other and talk about what different members are doing and what else we could be doing. Here's Justin's contact information and mine if you have questions, if you want to have ideas for contacts for your local chapter. And they have a monthly meeting on the second Saturday of each month at the Eno River UU Church at noon to 2. So more contact information for Citizens Climate Lobby's intro call, and another way to join is to text join to that number. On the letters, hopefully there's a tick box. If you want to join, you can tick get more information and join CCL on your letters. So that's what I had to say. And are there any questions?
I work for an organization, just to be clear, that's in red, carbon credits. So we put 60% of the revenue back into the communities in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. I'm in particular interested in companies like Shell that you put up there buy our carbon credits. I'm very supportive of this, but I'm particularly interested in the dividend portion. I think that was Sandra's question as well. How does this impact the poor in the U.S.? So in her example, it was people who drive at least an hour away, and how is this going to impact them?
I mean, the dividend is per capita. So everyone gets the same dividend regardless of their purchases, their greenhouse gas emissions. Those of us with that are emitting less will pay less in a carbon tax and will be economically ahead. And those who are emitting more than the average will end up paying slightly more. But because it's the same check amount for everyone, it's going to benefit the poor more. I don't know. I couldn't really hear the question, so I'm not sure if that addressed the questions.
I'm very supportive of reducing emissions and improving health through climate and saving our world. A large part of the U.S. live in rural areas, and so I'm just wondering how, and knowing that many people in rural areas travel quite a distance to work in low-income jobs. So could you walk us through how this would be described to a family with having to pay additional taxes on gas, so that they understand that there is a dividend benefit and that ultimately this benefits there. So I guess I'd like to hear you walk through that, and also just wondering whether or not the algorithm to determine the benefit of this has been done for rural Americans.
Rural communities do, on average, have a larger carbon footprint than urban communities. But the effect, the income effect is much stronger than that. So middle and lower income families in rural communities are still going to benefit by and large on getting back more than they're spending. There is a difference between rural and urban, but the income difference is much greater, and there are more lower income folks in rural areas. Higher income folks tend to be in more urban areas.
You threw some numbers that a commission decided that we had 12 years left to make a change, and that in 30 years we will match Europe's taxes on gas and petrol. Where did you decide that 40% was a good break-even point on your plan, instead of being a little more aggressive with the limited time that we have?
Our proposal of starting low and raising at $10 a ton every year has been around for most of a decade. So we thought we should start this earlier, but we've kept with the same proposal. The 40% reduction that we calculate for our proposal is most of what the IPCC report says we need to do now. It's not all of it, but we also have one of the most aggressive proposals in Congress. So what we need to do is we need to get this kind of policy in place that has a significant ramp, because that is going to drive the changes not only in consumption but in investment that we need to make.
I'm Bill Brooks, and my background is business. I'm totally supportive of the bill, but I have a question. It's based on a cubic ton of carbon emissions. How is a cubic ton measured,
It is relatively straightforward because when fossil fuels, oil, gas, or coal are produced, there's a fixed amount of carbon in them. And the first time they're sold at well-documented specifications and quantities so that we know exactly how many carbon atoms are in each barrel of that kind of oil or that ton of coal. And when they're burned, almost all of that is converted into CO2. So it's a relatively straightforward calculation on that amount. And then that follows the product all the way through the value chain. And it may be burned at different times in the value chain in the refining process, but it all could eventually be burned. But then there is a rebate for those carbon atoms that are turned into durable products and are not going to be burned. So if durable plastic is made, that can get a rebate.
I'm going to hand the microphone to Justin so that the couple minutes we have left, he can introduce himself and mention the items that he has over here on the table. That's all right?
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
So I guess first of all, really quick, just to highlight the bipartisanship of CCL. My name is Dr. Justin Bauman. I'm a coral reef researcher here at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. I study the impacts of climate change on coral reefs and marine systems across the globe, and I represent the farther left political spectrum. So I don't know if it goes further left. But, you know, Bill and I work together working for this solution because we both really believe in it. We come from different backgrounds, and we think that this is at least the greatest first step forward that we can take. So thank all of you for being here, first of all, and for carrying and being part of this series and having this series at your church. This is amazing. Great group of people. We have a couple things over here on the wall that we can get you all involved with if you're interested. First, we do have letters that you can write to your members of Congress. So that would be David Price or your senators, Tom Tillis or Richard Burr, if you're interested. And we will hand deliver them to their offices. So if you are interested, please come fill out a form. We'll be handing them around. You can also check boxes to get email updates from us on here. In addition to that, we have a sign-up sheet for joining our CCL chapter where you can learn more about us. We do have a meeting next Saturday at Beaton River Missouri Universalist Fellowship, Saturday at noon. So for those of you who are going to Raleigh, I recognize that there are other social justice things going on next weekend, but I'll be at CCL and you're welcome to join. We also have a sign-up sheet where you can join our calling campaign where we call our senators or Tillis and say, please do something about climate change. Everybody signs up, you get an email once a month, they send you a script and it says like, hey, it'd be great if you did something about this, that would be awesome. These are my values, this is where I'm from, I want you to take action, please do it. And it's really, really easy. And there's no pressure to ever do it, you just get an email and it says, it's your turn to call if you want. So those are the things we have over there. And then, like I said, I am a scientist. My background is in climate, so if you want to talk more about the bill, you want to talk more about the policy, you want to talk more about the science behind it, I am more than happy to do that individually or in groups after this is over. So thanks for your time. I'm going to be over there.
We've got the sign-up sheet moving around. We've got more sign-up possibilities over here. And then also, Ashley and I will be sending a follow-up email pertaining to this class with links and additional information. But we will only send that to you if you have given us your email address. So on this sheet that Ashley's passing